6 reasons God removes people from your life. Have you ever looked around and realized that the people you once called friends are no longer there? It's like one day you woke up and the phone stopped ringing, the invitations stopped coming, and the conversations grew cold. Suddenly, you find yourself standing alone, wondering, what did I do wrong? It's a tough place to be, and it's easy to feel like you've been abandoned or rejected. But what if I told you that your isolation might not be about rejection at all? What if it's about divine redirection? I want you to lean in and listen closely, because this message is for you. You see, sometimes God removes people from your life, not to hurt you, but to protect you, to prepare you, and to position you for something greater. I know it feels painful right now. I know the silence is loud and the loneliness is heavy. But before you start doubting yourself or questioning your worth, understand this. God doesn't make mistakes. If He allowed certain people to leave your life, there's a reason behind it. Maybe you've prayed for growth, for purpose, for clarity. And then suddenly, the very people you thought you needed were gone. It's confusing, isn't it? But here's the truth. Not everyone is meant to go where God is taking you. Some people are only part of your journey for a season. When that season ends, God may close doors you never thought would shut. And that's okay. Those closed doors are not a sign of failure. They are a sign of direction. God is guiding you to a place where distractions are minimized and your focus is sharpened. You might feel like you're losing everything, but sometimes losing everything is the only way to gain what truly matters. It's in the quiet, in the solitude, that God does His greatest work. When you're no longer surrounded by noise and opinions, you can finally hear His voice clearly. And that's when transformation begins. Maybe you're struggling to understand why certain friendships fell apart, why people you trusted turned away, or why you're left standing alone. It's easy to think it's a punishment or a consequence of something you did wrong. But sometimes, it's about protection. God sees the hearts and intentions you cannot see. He hears the conversations you didn't hear. He knows the plans that were made behind your back. And in His mercy, He removes people before they can hinder your purpose. This season of isolation is not meant to break you. It's meant to build you. It's meant to strengthen your faith, deepen your character, and prepare you for the assignment that lies ahead. But first, you have to trust the process. You have to believe that God's plan is greater than the pain of losing people you thought would always be there. You have to understand that your worth is not defined by who stays or who leaves. Your worth is anchored in the One who never changes, who never leaves, and who never fails. If you've been feeling abandoned, misunderstood, or lonely, I want you to know that you're not alone. God is with you in this season, even if it feels like no one else is. And He's working behind the scenes, orchestrating a future that is far greater than what you can see right now. So, don't be discouraged by who walked away. Don't waste your energy chasing after people who were never meant to stay. Instead, fix your eyes on God, the author and finisher of your faith. Trust that every removal is for a reason, every separation has a purpose, and every loss is paving the way for greater gain. Stay with me as we explore 6 powerful facts about a man with no friends and how God's divine hand is at work, even when it feels like you're standing alone. Because sometimes, being alone is exactly where you need to be for God to take you where you need to go. There's a powerful truth that not many people talk about. Isolation often comes before elevation. It sounds contradictory, doesn't it? We're taught that success comes with crowds, with networks, with people applauding your every move. But in God's kingdom, the path to greatness is often marked by seasons of solitude. If you're feeling alone right now, if it seems like everyone has walked away or turned their backs on you, take heart. It might just be that God is preparing you for something greater. Think about it. Before Joseph became second in command in Egypt, he was thrown into a pit by his own brothers and sold into slavery. Before Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, he spent 40 years in the wilderness, away from everything familiar. Even Jesus, before starting his public ministry, spent 40 days alone in the desert. Why? Because isolation precedes elevation. It's in the quiet places, the lonely seasons, that God prepares his chosen ones for the assignments that require strength, character, and unwavering faith. You see, when God has a purpose for your life, he will often separate you from people who cannot go where he is taking you. It's not because they're bad people. It's because they are not equipped to handle the vision God has given you. Not everyone will understand your calling. Not everyone will support your dreams. And that's okay. God removes people not to punish you, but to prepare you. He is clearing the path, removing distractions, and setting the stage for your next level. But let's be real. It hurts. When friends you thought would always be there suddenly leave, it feels like rejection. It feels like betrayal. And it leaves you questioning yourself, wondering what went wrong. But what if I told you that nothing went wrong? What if I told you that God is strategically positioning you for something far greater than you can imagine? Sometimes, the very people you're crying over are the ones God had to remove because they were blocking your blessing. They were hindering your growth, poisoning your potential, and standing in the way of your purpose. I know it's hard to see it right now, but think about this. If Joseph's brothers hadn't betrayed him, he never would have made it to Egypt. If Potiphar's wife hadn't falsely accused him, he never would have ended up in prison. And if he hadn't been in that prison, he never would have interpreted Pharaoh's dream and risen to power. What looked like rejection was actually divine direction. God was orchestrating every step, even the painful ones, to lead Joseph to his destiny. Maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe you're in the pit, wondering why the people you loved hurt you so deeply. Maybe you're in the prison of loneliness, feeling abandoned and forgotten. But could it be that God is setting you up for the palace? Could it be that the isolation is necessary for the elevation that's coming? Could it be that God is removing people now to make room for new connections, divine appointments, and greater opportunities? When you're isolated, it feels like you're losing everything. But what you're really losing are the limitations. God is stripping away the crutches you've been leaning on, so you can learn to stand in faith. He's removing the voices that have been influencing you, so you can clearly hear his voice. And he's clearing out the people who were holding you back, so you can move forward without any baggage. What feels like a setback is actually a setup for your comeback. I know the waiting is hard. I know the loneliness feels unbearable at times. But remember this: God is not punishing you. He's preparing you. He's building strength in your solitude, resilience in your rejection, and wisdom in your waiting. Don't rush the process. Don't try to fill the void with superficial relationships just to avoid feeling lonely. Let God do his work in you. Let him prune, shape, and refine you. Because when the time is right, He will elevate you in ways you never expected. And when that elevation comes, you'll look back on this season and understand why God had to isolate you. You'll realize that the people who left were never meant to see the fullness of what God is about to do in your life. You'll see that their absence was necessary for your advancement. And you'll thank God, not just for the people who stayed, but also for the ones who had to go. So, if you're feeling alone today, hold on. If you're standing by yourself, stay strong. God is setting the stage. He's writing your story. And this chapter of isolation is just the prelude to your elevation. Trust the author, because the best is yet to come. Now let's talk about another truth that's hard to swallow but crucial to understand. God removes distractions to sharpen your focus. It's not just about who left. It's about why they had to leave. Sometimes, the very people we cling to are the ones keeping us from stepping into our purpose. We don't always see it because we're blinded by loyalty, comfort, or even fear of being alone. But God sees what we cannot. He sees how certain relationships are hindering our growth, clouding our vision, and diverting our attention from what truly matters. Maybe you've noticed that as soon as you started pursuing God's calling, people started disappearing. Maybe the friends you used to party with don't call you anymore. Maybe the people you confided in stopped showing interest, and maybe it hurts because you thought they were genuine. But what if their exit is God's way of removing distractions? What if their absence is God's gift of focus? Think about Gideon. God told him to lead an army against the Midianites. But before the battle, God did something surprising. He reduced Gideon's army from 32,000 to just 300 men. Why? Because God wanted Gideon to rely on him, not on numbers. He removed the distractions to sharpen Gideon's focus and ensure that the victory would point back to God's power, not human strength. Sometimes God does the same in our lives. He reduces our circle, not because we're unworthy of friendship, but because He wants us to rely on Him fully. He takes away the noise, the drama, and the unnecessary influences so we can see clearly where He's leading us. When you're surrounded by people who don't understand your vision, it's easy to get discouraged. It's easy to settle for mediocrity just to fit in. But when God removes those voices, you're free to pursue your purpose with boldness and clarity. This is why it's crucial not to chase after people who walked away. If God removed them, it's because they were hindering your focus. It's because they couldn't see the vision God gave you, and their doubt would have poisoned your faith. It's because their priorities didn't align with the assignment on your life, and their influence would have pulled you off course. So, instead of mourning who left, thank God for who stayed. Thank Him for every person He removed, because their absence is making room for divine connections that are aligned with your purpose. It's giving you the focus you need to walk boldly into your destiny. And when you reach that destiny, you'll realize that losing them was a necessary step in finding yourself and fulfilling God's calling. Stay with me as we continue to explore these powerful truths. There's more to uncover, and it's about to get even deeper. Have you ever been blindsided by betrayal? Maybe it was someone you trusted with your secrets, your dreams, your heart. And just when you thought they had your back, they turned against you. It's one of the most painful experiences to endure because it feels personal, like a dagger to the soul. But what if I told you that sometimes betrayal is a form of divine protection? What if the people who walked away were never meant to stay because God saw something you didn't? One of the hardest truths to accept is that God removes people to protect us from hidden enemies. You see, God hears conversations you never heard. He sees the intentions behind smiles that looked genuine but were laced with envy. He watches the actions behind the scenes when you're not around. And because He loves you, He doesn't always give you a warning. Sometimes He just removes the person without explanation, leaving you to wonder why. But let's go back to one of the most profound examples of betrayal in history: Judas and Jesus. From the outside looking in, Judas appeared to be a trusted disciple, part of Jesus' inner circle. He walked with Jesus, ate with Him, listened to His teachings. Yet all along his heart was corrupted by greed and deceit. Jesus knew Judas's intentions long before the betrayal happened. But He didn't confront him. He didn't expose him to the other disciples. He allowed Judas to play his role because even betrayal has a purpose in God's plan. That's a hard pill to swallow, isn't it? That sometimes God allows people with hidden agendas to stay close long enough to fulfill His purpose. But when their part in your story is over, God removes them, not to hurt you, but to protect you from the harm they were capable of inflicting. Imagine if Judas had stayed even after the betrayal. Would Jesus have been able to complete His mission with someone so disloyal by His side? No. And in the same way, God knows that certain people can't go where He's taking you. It's painful to lose people you thought were loyal. It's devastating to realize that the person you trusted was plotting against you all along. But God's protection is not always obvious. Sometimes it looks like rejection. Sometimes it feels like loneliness. But it's better to walk alone than to walk with someone who's secretly working against you. You might be wondering why God didn't just expose them sooner. Why did He allow you to get hurt? Why did He let you trust someone who would betray you? And the answer lies in growth. Sometimes God allows betrayal to teach you discernment, to strengthen your spirit, and to prepare you for greater battles ahead. It's in the pain of betrayal that you learn to lean on God and not on man. It's through heartbreak that you discover who you are and who you can't afford to keep close. God's protection doesn't always come wrapped in comfort. Sometimes it comes through painful separation. Sometimes it comes through people walking away without explanation. But if you knew what God knows, you would be thanking Him for every person who left. You would be praising Him for the rejection that was actually redirection. You would be grateful that He ended relationships before they could destroy you. Maybe the people who left were secretly envious of your progress. Maybe they were undermining your confidence with subtle negativity. Maybe they were planning to sabotage your success once you reach the next level. You may never know the full story, but God knows. And His removal is a form of rescue. So, if you're feeling abandoned, if you're wondering why people you loved and trusted turned their backs on you, take comfort in knowing that God is protecting you from battles you didn't even know existed. He's shielding you from harm you never saw coming. And He's setting you apart, not because you're not good enough, but because you're too valuable to be surrounded by people who don't truly support you. God's protection is one of the greatest gifts, even when it doesn't feel like it. And in time, you'll look back and realize that every person who walked away was doing you a favor. They were making room for people who genuinely care, for relationships that are pure, and for connections that will lift you higher. Trust God's protection, even when it feels like rejection, because He's always working behind the scenes for your good. And now, let's move into one of the most beautiful reasons God removes people from your life: to build intimacy with Him. I know that sounds cliché, but let's be real for a moment. How often do we allow people to fill spaces in our hearts that should be reserved for God? How many times have we run to friends for comfort, validation, or advice before we even thought to pray? It's so easy to lean on people when they're available. It's convenient to seek affirmation from those around us, rather than waiting on God's voice. But sometimes, God wants to get you alone, so He can have your full attention. Sometimes He allows people to leave because their presence was drowning out His whispers. And in His love and mercy, He will take away everything you were leaning on until He becomes your only source. It's not because God is cruel. It's because He knows that no human relationship can fulfill the void only He can fill. He knows that if you continue to depend on people, you'll never learn to fully depend on Him. So, He allows you to walk through seasons of solitude, not to punish you, but to draw you closer to Him. It's in the quiet, in the loneliness, that you discover the beauty of God's presence. Look at Moses. Before he became the great leader who parted the Red Sea and led Israel to freedom, Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness. It was in that isolation that he encountered God in the burning bush. It was in solitude that he received his assignment. And it was in loneliness that he learned to rely on God for every step of his journey. Even Jesus, the Son of God, retreated to solitary places to pray. He withdrew from the crowds, even from his closest disciples, to spend time alone with the Father. If Jesus needed solitude to fulfill His purpose, how much more do we need those moments of intimacy with God? I know it feels like a punishment when people leave. I know the silence can be deafening. But solitude is not loneliness when you're in the presence of God. It's an invitation to deeper intimacy. It's a calling to come closer, to be still, and to know that He is God. When everyone else is gone, He remains. When friends walk away, He stays. When the world is silent, His voice becomes clearer. Maybe you've been searching for love, for acceptance, for validation from people who were never meant to provide it. Maybe you've been trying to fill your heart with temporary connections when God wants to give you eternal comfort. Maybe this season of solitude is God's way of redirecting your attention back to Him. Because no human love, no friendship, no relationship can compare to the love of God. This season is not about what you've lost. It's about what you're about to gain. You're gaining intimacy with the One who created you, who knows you better than anyone else. You're gaining wisdom, strength, and faith that can only be developed in the quiet. And you're gaining clarity about who you are and what God has called you to do. So instead of mourning the people who left, start seeking the One who remains. Instead of chasing after those who walked away, run to the One who stands with open arms. God wants your heart, your attention, your love, and sometimes He removes people just to remind you that He is more than enough. Stay with me, because we're just getting started. There's more to uncover, and God is about to reveal His purpose in every season of loneliness you've ever faced. Have you ever wondered why the road to your destiny seems so lonely? Why, just when you're about to step into something great, people start falling away like leaves in autumn. It feels unfair, doesn't it? Just when you need support the most, it seems like you're left standing alone. But there's a divine reason for this, and it's something that most people don't realize. God removes people to prepare you for a new assignment. You see, preparation is a process, and it's not always comfortable. God knows what lies ahead. He knows the challenges you'll face, the battles you'll fight, and the victories you'll win. And not everyone can handle the weight of your calling. Not everyone is meant to go where God is taking you. Some people are only meant to be with you for a season, to teach you a lesson, to support you at a particular stage, or even to test your faith. But when that season is over, God will remove them so you can grow into the next level of your purpose. Look at David's life. Before he became king, David spent years running from Saul, hiding in caves, and living in isolation. He lost his position, his wife, his mentor, and even his best friend, Jonathan. It seemed like everything and everyone David loved was taken away from him. But God was not punishing David. He was preparing him. In the wilderness, David learned to trust God alone. In isolation, he developed the heart of a shepherd and the strength of a warrior. By the time David reached the throne, he was ready, not just in skill, but in character. That's how God works. He isolates you to prepare you. He separates you from familiar faces because the new assignment requires a different version of you, a stronger, wiser, more mature version. The people who knew you in your past season might try to keep you in the box they've always known you in. They might remind you of your mistakes, your failures, and your weaknesses. But God is doing a new thing, and He needs you to see yourself the way He sees you, as victorious, chosen, and anointed for greatness. It's painful when people you thought would be by your side forever suddenly disappear. It feels like rejection. It feels like abandonment. But could it be that God is protecting you from people who would have sabotaged your new assignment? Could it be that their doubts, insecurities, and negativity would have hindered your progress? Could it be that God is setting you apart so you can walk boldly into your purpose without any hindrances? Think about Paul the Apostle. After his dramatic conversion on the road to Damascus, Paul didn't immediately start preaching. Instead, he spent 3 years in Arabia, away from the apostles and the crowds. Why? Because God was preparing him for a unique assignment. Paul's calling was different. He was chosen to spread the gospel to the Gentiles, to write letters that would shape Christianity, and to endure hardships that required unshakable faith. If Paul had stayed in his comfort zone, surrounded by familiar faces, he might have compromised his message. But in isolation, Paul was transformed. He received revelation directly from God, and by the time he emerged, he was ready to change the world. That's the power of divine preparation. It isolates you, not to diminish you, but to develop you. It separates you from the crowd, so you can hear God's voice clearly. It prunes away old mindsets, old habits, and old connections that would weigh you down. And it equips you with the strength, wisdom, and resilience needed to fulfill your calling. So, if you're feeling lonely today, if it feels like God has stripped away everyone you leaned on, take heart. He's not punishing you. He's preparing you. He's setting you apart for something that eyes have not seen and ears have not heard. And when the time is right, He will reveal the new assignment that's been waiting for you all along. And now we come to one of the most beautiful truths of all. God removes people to align you with His purpose and plan. It sounds simple, but it's profound. You see, God has a divine blueprint for your life, and everything you go through is orchestrated to align you with that purpose. Every person who enters or exits your life is part of that plan. Every connection, every rejection, every betrayal, and every goodbye is a piece of the puzzle that ultimately leads you to your destiny. Think about Abraham. God called him to leave his father's house, his country, and his comfort zone to go to a place he had never seen before. But Abraham didn't leave alone. He took his nephew, Lot, with him, and for a while it seemed like a good idea. They were family after all. But eventually conflict arose between their herdsmen, and it became clear that they could not dwell together. Abraham had to make a choice, and he told Lot, "Let there be no strife between us. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right, and if you go to the right, I'll go to the left." It was only after Lot separated from him that God appeared to Abraham and gave him the promise. "Lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see I give to you and your descendants forever." Genesis 13:14-15. Do you see the pattern? God couldn't reveal the fullness of his promise to Abraham until he separated from Lot. And sometimes, God cannot reveal his purpose to you until he removes the people who are clouding your vision. Not because they're bad people, but because they're not meant to see what God is showing you. Their perspective is limited, and their presence could limit your faith. It's hard to let go of people you love. It's painful to watch relationships fade. But when God calls you higher, he will often require you to separate from those who are not aligned with his plan. And the sooner you embrace that separation, the sooner you'll walk into the fullness of what God has prepared for you. Your purpose is too great to be hindered by misplaced loyalty. Your calling is too significant to be compromised by temporary connections, and God loves you too much to let you settle for less than his best. So he removes people, closes doors, and redirects your path to align you with his divine purpose. When you finally understand this, you'll stop chasing after people who left. You'll stop mourning relationships that ended, and you'll start embracing the beauty of God's plan, even when it doesn't make sense. You'll trust that every removal was for a reason. Every separation had a purpose, and every loss was paving the way for a greater gain. I know it's been hard. I know the loneliness has been heavy, and the silence has been loud. But I also know that God never wastes pain. He never allows separation without purpose, and he never leaves you empty without a plan to fill you with something greater. So, to the man who feels alone, abandoned, or misunderstood, hold on. God is working behind the scenes. He's aligning you with your destiny, preparing you for new assignments, and protecting you from hidden enemies. He's building intimacy with you, sharpening your focus, and setting you up for elevation. And when the time is right, he will bring the right people, the right connections, and the right opportunities into your life. Trust his timing. Trust his process, and most importantly, trust his love. Because every removal, every goodbye, and every lonely season is proof that God is not just writing your story, he's perfecting it. And the best is yet to come.